What starts out as a simple robbery ends up with a murder, which ends up with suspects fleeing to Lake County, the death of a cop, a high-speed chase, and a major shootout. This is the story of Lake County's own Bonnie and Clyde couple. The names were Annika Ostberg and William Bob Cox. This is their story before the crimes happened, the crimes themselves, and the interesting story afterwards that actually ended up sparking issues with Sweden. This is a very interesting story, and you're going to want to stick around for it. Hi, my name is Cheyenne Blue. I'm a real estate agent over here in Lake County, California. I like telling stories about the area, the history, true facts, things along that line, whether it be good, bad, or ugly. And this story I actually let my viewers choose for me to do today. And this one, it definitely sent me down a rabbit hole. I had already known about the Lake County Bonnie and Clyde couple, but when I actually looked into the whole history of it, there was so much more to the story than I had realized, and I think you guys are going to find this one very fascinating. If you like videos like this, don't forget to like this one and subscribe to my channel for future videos. The first person I want to talk about is Annika Maria Ostberg DZ. Annika was born on January 6th of 1954 over in Stockholm, Sweden. She lived with her parents in Hässelby, which is actually a very nice neighborhood over in Stockholm. Her life was good and comfortable until her father ended up leaving her and her mother. Not long after the father left, the mother ended up falling in love with an American man who convinced her to move with him back to the States. Annika really did not want to go. She begged and pleaded her mother not to take her to this unknown land, away from all of her family and friends and the only place that she had ever known. But Annika, she had no choice in the matter, and they ended up moving to San Francisco in 1964. So she goes from this really nice, conservative Swedish neighborhood to this drug-infested, freewheeling culture that was going on in San Francisco during the hippie movement. Understandably, this girl, she was not happy, and this weighed a lot of strain with her mother, and of course her stepfather too. Now, the stepfather, he was actually a very wealthy businessman, and he wanted to provide for his new wife and child. But Annika, she blamed him for ruining her life, because, I mean, she's 10. What do you expect? She doesn't really understand that he's trying to help out. She just sees it as, oh, well, you stole me and my mom from this comfortable life that I've always lived and put me into this place that I absolutely hate. Annika started refusing to not do anything around the house and even refused not to do her schoolwork. On top of this, Annika at school, she was being bullied constantly for not being able to speak English and being an outsider. Poor girl, she already felt like an outsider from moving from a completely different country and away from everything that she ever known, but the school situation just made it so much worse. She just had this mindset of, I don't belong here, and these people are proving I don't belong here. Things continued to get worse and worse until she finally ended up running away at the age of 13. Here she is, this young girl in the streets of San Francisco with nothing. And she ends up getting involved with a very sketchy group that used drugs and committed petty crimes. It wasn't the best group in the world, but she wanted to feel like she fit in somewhere. She wanted to be accepted by someone. And unfortunately, this group was the group that ended up accepting her. She claimed that she began using drugs because of the peer pressure and the need of wanting to fit in. By the time she was 14, she was addicted to heroin. She was only a child. At the age of 16, she ended up finding out that she was pregnant. This actually helped her pull out of her addiction and to get help, get healthy, because she wanted what was best for her baby. She was in agony through the process, but she kicked the habit before the baby was born. She gave birth to this child in her own home. She was terrified that CPS was going to take him away, even though that she had cleaned up, because she did still have the scars from her use from before. She ended up bringing into the world a beautiful, healthy baby boy named Sven. Now, Sven's father didn't contribute to them, and she had to do what she had to do as a single mom in order to provide for her and her son. So she ended up prostituting herself and stripping in order to provide for her baby. That was until she met a man named Brian Deasy. Now, Brian wanted to help not only Annika, but her son, and he moved them to Stockton. Not soon afterwards, they got married. So Annika becomes a housewife and things become easy for her and her son. It definitely took some adjusting because she was so used to living on the streets and living this crazy life. And now she actually had someone that was willing to provide for her, take care of her and her son. And she adjusted. She was becoming a housewife, but sadly that hook on addiction ended up getting the better of her. And next thing you know, she ended up abandoning her son and going back to the streets of San Francisco. She was back to being a drug-addicted prostitute. Her apartment, that was a big hub for a lot of the drug addicts around the area. It was often you'd find people just hanging out and sleeping on the floor at all hours of the day. In 1972, there was a young man named Donald McKay that was found dead in her apartment. Of course, this ended up opening an investigation. They were trying to figure out who exactly it was that killed the guy. And there was a lot of people that came in and out of her apartment, so there was speculation it could be anyone. But when the police questioned her, she actually said something along the lines of wanting to kill the guy. However, the people that were still in the apartment, they actually stated that it was Annika's boyfriend that she was with at the time. The police were more focused on her, even though it was stated that it was the boyfriend. She ended up getting arrested, but only got probation in the end because there wasn't enough physical evidence and there were no witnesses to state what actually happened. I find it kind of weird though, because they said that it was the boyfriend, the witnesses did, but then they went after her. I honestly don't understand that. And I was trying to find more information to actually piece that together, but that was what I could find. Even though she was on probation, this didn't seem to faze her from staying out of the dark world of things, and she ended up turning to theft. She ended up getting caught that same year for stealing. The judge was pretty lenient for her this time, and he ended up only giving her 18 months probation. Yet, even after that, she ended up still getting in trouble yet again a few short months later for illegal substances. The judge ended up extending her probation to 3 years, with the exception that she would get off the drugs. She actually did this for 3 years, only to find herself back addicted only a few weeks after her probation was up. So here she is, she's refusing to contact her family. She hasn't had any contact with her mother at all at this point, no contact with her child, no one. Like, she's just stuck in her own head, spinning out of control, and her lifestyle gets more dangerous in the 1980s. This is because she ended up with a known drug dealer, Bob Cox. Now, Bob, this guy was a seasoned criminal, and he served jail sentences all over the world, mainly had things to do with drug possession and sorts. With the two of them together, their mutual drug addiction got a lot worse for the both of them. Soon they found themselves broke, and they needed to make money. Their idea for making money ended up being that they wanted to rob somebody. Specifically, Bob was the one that had the idea to rob, and Annika wanted to help. On April 30th, 1981, the two of them got into a truck with the intent of robbery. Choosing the spot to rob, though, was the tough decision for the two of them. They thought about long and hard. And then Annika remembered a man by the name of Joe Torre. See, Torre, he owned a restaurant that Annika would often bring deliveries of stolen meat to. Torre actually preferred getting the meat from Annika. It was kind of like one of those don't ask, don't tell situations. Even though he had the option to get it from actual distributors, the meat from Annika ended up being far more cost effective for him. So he was like, I don't care where you got it from, just bring it to me, don't tell me. So what they ended up doing is they disguised the truck, they filled it with boxes, and Bob was hidden in the back amongst the boxes. This way he wouldn't expect anything, he would just be expecting her to drop off the usual stolen meat. Annika went to the back pretending to unload the goods. She opened the door and Bob came out, shot Torre in cold blood. Together they ransacked the entire warehouse, getting anything possible of value before they ditched. They ran to Lake County, California, right here. The reason why they ended up coming here was Annika's son was actually living here over in Clear Lake. She wanted to see him one more time because she knew after the murder that they would have to disappear for a long time to hide from the crime. However, fate had a different idea. Randomly, out of nowhere, their truck breaks down in the middle of the highway, somewhere between Kitt's Corner and Manning Flat. A Lake County sheriff's officer just so happened to be in the area and went to the truck to see if he could be of any assistance. This officer was Sergeant Helbush. He went up to the car and asked if he needed help. Now, according to Annika, Bob shot the officer as she was looking for her ID to hand to him. They had thought that he was there to arrest him rather than that he was actually there to try to help them with their broken down car. However, their crime at this point still hadn't been even discovered yet. So according to Annika, Bob shoots the officer falls to the ground, and then Bob proceeds to shoot the officer several more times while he's laying on the ground. Something else kind of fascinating about this, though, is when forensic experts explored this, it appeared that Annika was actually the one that shot the officer as he was walking back to the car. The reason for this is if her story was true, there would be at least one wound on the front of the officer, because according to her story, he was shot while he was standing in front of the window. In forensics, that means that there would be at least one bullet wound coming from the front. But according to the autopsy, all of the bullet wounds came from the back, including one in the back of the head. Knowing they murdered the police officer, they ended up dragging his body over to the side of the road. They proceeded to steal the officer's wallet, pistol, and the real kicker, the police car. Because you're in incognito, and that's definitely not suspicious or anything. At the Lake County Sheriff's Station, one of the dispatchers was trying to get a hold of Helbush. There was no answer. That was not normal for him at all. They suspected that something was horribly wrong and sent another officer out to find him. His normal route was planned, so they knew that he had to be somewhere between Clear Lake and Lakeport since his shift was actually coming to an end. Unfortunately, they ended up finding his deceased body and his car was missing, so they knew the killer had to be the one to have taken it. The entire Lake County police force was alerted about the missing car and the possible police killer being inside. They scanned the entire area looking for any trace of them. A Lake County sheriff's officer by the name of Don Anderson was over by Harbin Hot Springs when he was directed to go up Highway 175 towards Cobb. He ended up seeing the stolen cop car by the base of Cobb Mountain. He whips the car around and starts chasing the suspects. This quickly ends up being a high-speed pursuit. Deputy Anderson informs the other patrol cars in the area that he had found them and he was on their tail. They all set route to help catch the killers. The couple started panicking as they saw the police car behind them. They gunned the car to try to make their escape. Luckily for the police, the road that they were on happened to not be in the best kept condition, and as the suspects hit a sharp turn, they ended up crashing the car at the fork of Dry Creek Road, and both of them ended up being unharmed and unfortunately still conscious. Anderson called out, "Put your hands up!" Bob ends up yelling back, "No way!" The two attempted to get out and flee on foot, but Anderson already had them in his gun sight. He shot at them, they ducked behind the wreckage, and start shooting back. The next part is a little bit different depending on some of the articles that I read, so I'm going to tell you both versions of the story. So bullets, they're going back and forth, and Deputy Anderson actually hits Bob a few times. Bob, knowing he might die, ends up surrendering. Don actually ended up getting a leg wound during the shooting, but it ended up not being that serious. After he apprehended Bob, he ended up making his way over to the car where Annika was at, still hiding, and he approached her. She agreed to surrender, but once he tried to put cuffs on her, Annika jumped, attempting to reach the gun that was on the ground. So the deputy is holding Bob with one hand while trying to deal with Annika, grabbing Annika with the other, and at this time is when apparently the other officers arrived at the scene, immediately pulling their guns on Annika. Now, the other story that I found was that the officers showed up before the whole thing with Annika happened, but either way, he definitely did his job getting these two behind bars. This story does not end at the arrest. It gets even more interesting as it goes on. For instance, you think stealing a cop car is dumb? It gets worse. After the arrest, the two of them end up getting transported to the Lake County Jail. Bob was placed in a cell with a guy that had been arrested for the murder of his wife. This guy's name was Gerald Stanley. Gerald Stanley also happened to kill other girlfriends and wives. The two of them, they're sitting there, they're talking about how they want to both escape the jail. Stanley, he had already been there for a while. He stated that there was actually a brief period of time each day where there were only 2 police officers on duty. If they were to stage a fake suicide or a fake death, to get those officers to come into the cell, that they could easily overpower the officers and escape. Brilliant plan. How would they fake the suicide, though? By Cox pretending to hang himself with the bedsheets. They get everything staged up, and Stanley calls out for the cops to come help at the cell. Well, Cox ended up playing the role a little too well and accidentally ended up taking his own life. Stanley, he stayed in jail. So is that all the craziest? Nope. It gets crazier. So Annika's partner is deceased, but she's still on trial. When she appeared in front of the judge, she claimed that she was under the influence of drugs during all this, and it clouded her brain, clouded her decision making. She was understandably trying to gain sympathy so that way she could get a lighter sentence. But when the judge ordered the blood test, it came back clean. Her defense relied heavily on her drug use and the fact that she had a tough childhood and a harsh life. They did state that their client had a very long list of offenses previously, but they claimed that this was because of the life that she had. After all, if it wasn't for the way that her life went, she would have never met Bob, and this situation probably never would have happened. When she took the stand, she repeated her story about the drug use during the time of the murder, and that she was simply following Bob's lead and was not an active part in any sense. She was merely just a witness. The prosecutors, on the other hand, had a different story, with the drug test showing that it was clean during the murders and circumstantial evidence that actually made it look like she was the one likely responsible for Helbush's murder. Annika denied having anything to do with the death of the cop, saying that Cox actually surprised her with the decision to shoot the officer. But it is easy to blame someone that can't defend himself, since he had his jail mishap and had a pretty bad history before all this happened. People in the courtroom were actually believing her claims. She seemed like she was being sincere, but court procedures ended up stopping since Annika took a plea deal of 25 years to life. The court at this point had already decided that the death penalty was out of the question, since they really couldn't prove that she killed anyone. This sentence that she got was a lot better than her lawyers assumed that she was going to get. She even had the possibility of parole after 12 and a half years. This was actually pretty standard at the time for prisoners with good behavior. During Annika's sentence, she had already served 2.5 years during the court procedures, and she was being held in a maximum security prison on death row during this whole trial going on. This time in death row was incredibly hard on her. She ended up finding comfort in writing. It was something that she hadn't really done before, but it filled the emptiness in her time that was just ticking by. To her surprise, it was actually extremely therapeutic and helped her to grow as a person. After she was removed from death row and put into a women's prison, she continued her passion for writing. She actually ended up writing and publishing her first book in 1999. This book was about her life, and it became a bestseller over in Sweden, her home country. She later published 2 more books. Both of them were about her time behind bars and her struggles during it. She became a celebrity, a huge celebrity in her home country. The Swedish media wrote extensively about the case. Several long articles were being published every week about Annika. It was hard for the journalists to get statements from the police, so they started communicating with her family about what they knew and getting statements from them. According to them, Annika was not armed at all and was just following her boyfriend's lead. To the people of Sweden, it was absolutely astonishing to them that someone could be behind bars when they didn't actually commit a murder or harm anyone. Since her boyfriend was deceased, Sweden came to the conclusion that the United States justice system needed to find someone to blame for the killings, since it was one of their own police officers that had been killed. And that they, the United States, just wanted to put it on the easiest person that they could find. And they believed this because of what they were hearing from the families, what they were reading in the statements because they couldn't get an actual statement from the police at this time. Another thing you also got to keep in mind with Sweden is the Swedish justice system is a lot different than the one that we have here. And a similar crime in Sweden would get a shorter sentence of up to 7 years. Then they get released. There's not even probation. This sparked a huge outrage, and petitions started immediately to get Annika out of her situation. Once this was found out, then the information about the murders ended up going to them, but it was too late. They already made up their minds with the situation because of the other information that they were given. The majority of the Swedish public only believed the first version of events that were published in their articles, and the people here accused Sweden of being one-sided because Annika was Swedish. And that had to be the only reason they wanted her back. Annika started asking to be transferred over to the Swedish prisons, and Annika's pleas to Sweden, they were denied 4 times. But things changed in 2009. California Board of Parole Hearings reviewed her case again. Annika stated that she wanted to be transferred to Sweden, but remain incarcerated in order for her to be closer to her family. During this time, she ended up reconnecting with her mother once again. But unfortunately, her mother ended up moving back to Sweden, so she wasn't able to see Annika as often as she was before when she lived in the States. The California government code actually regulates transfers of prisoners where only a governor or an executive officer of the Board of Parole Hearings can approve it. In 2007, the Swedish minister Fredrik Reinfeldt met our California governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. The prime minister tried to convince him to let Annika transfer back to her country, but Schwarzenegger actually ignored the request. However, Sweden's diplomats continued to work on the case and managed to get it moving. She finally ended up getting transferred back to Sweden in 2009. There was a lot of speculation as to why she actually ended up getting granted the transfer, but she did remain incarcerated until May 2nd of 2011. After she was released, her and her mother fully repaired their relationship, and they spent most of their time together afterwards. Annika ended up spending a total of 30 years in prison, which is actually longer than almost any Swedish citizen has spent. This I found to be one of the most fascinating stories that I've come across. I already knew about the thing that happened with the officer, but everything else, I was just like, whoa, this was a lot bigger of a story than I thought it was going to be. What do you guys think actually happened? Do you think that Annika was part of the killings? Do you think that Bob Cox was the one that was behind everything and that she was just an innocent bystander? Honestly, I don't really know with this one. It's very interesting. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe to the channel for future videos. And if you have any ideas for what video you want me to do next, make sure to leave a comment down below. I love getting inquiries on stories that you guys want me to do because there are a lot of stories I know about Lake County, but I love getting comments and seeing something that somebody brings up that maybe I didn't know before or I didn't really understand the full spectrum of. This was one of those stories I really didn't understand the full spectrum of the story, and it is so fascinating. I'm really glad that I was able to be here and bring the story to you guys. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and until next time, have a good one.